Hi everyone, how are you?
Hi.
I'm Cindy Lee Tatasio. I'm the director of the Office of Research and Integrity, like Hannah had said. Hey, well, it's nice to see you all. Nice to see some of you again, to see you in face-to-face instead of just on the phone. We're going to go over a little bit today about IRB, and there's a lot of burning questions about a lot of different things. There's a lot of new changes that will be happening later that I'll talk a little bit about too. So I'm pretty informal, so any questions that you have at any time about any subject, please let me know. Okay. There we go. So we'll talk a little bit about the UNLV IRB, talk about some of the review categories, mainly so you can get an idea of the names and then kind of some of the types of research that kind of fall under the different categories, the how and when to submit, common pitfalls, which is always a good idea to avoid. We'll talk a little bit about research with students as well, some of the requirements and some of the things that we would like for faculty to do when doing research with students. And then also go over to IRBNet and talk a little bit about it and show you, if you haven't seen it already, about some of the commonly asked questions that people might have in IRBNet.
I'm those people.
We welcome questions anytime, at any time. Okay, so as many of you may know, we do have two institutional review boards. One is a social behavioral board and one is biomedical. What we have done is taken departments and specifically taken departments through a specific board. It's easier for you as researchers to know which board to submit to. What we've had in the past also is administrators specifically for certain boards, so you know who to call if you have questions. And so nursing, allied health as well, typically goes through the biomedical board. Okay. If you are going to be doing any research with School of Medicine faculty, if the School of Medicine faculty will be the PI, we have a new workspace inside of IRBNet that's for the School of Medicine IRB, but the biomedical IRB is the reviewing IRB for that IRB at this time. Okay, so that's only if the PI is a School of Medicine IRB or School of Medicine faculty member. And so we do have meetings every month for each board. Typically, the biomedical board is third Tuesday of the month. Due dates are about a month before. It's usually the meeting the month prior, but you can submit proposals at any time. The majority of our studies do not go to full board, so they're reviewed at any time during the month. Okay, as they come in, they get reviewed. Okay, so which review category? That's a very common question. How do we know? What do we submit for? And so there's excluded, exempt, expedited, and full boards, and we'll go through some of these. So the first question, of course, people want to know is, do I have to go through the IRB, right? Because you really don't want to have to go through it if you don't have to go through it. So the first thing you want to look at is whether it meets the definition of research, okay? It's a systematic investigation designed to contribute to generalizable knowledge. Okay, so is this for greater good? Are you trying to tell people about it through presentation, either at a conference or a poster or a publication, those kinds of things? And if that's a yes, then it meets the definition of research. Okay, and then we move on to the next definition, which is then human subject. And so a human subject has to be a living individual about whom an investigator conducting research either has an intervention or interaction with the person, okay? So, and even if it's not in person, so say for example it's an internet survey, that is termed an interaction, okay? Or identifiable private information. So in your case it would be research, but for de-identified data, okay, no identifiers at all, then it would be not meeting the definition of human subject. Okay, some people still want us to make those determinations because it depends also sometimes on the source of the data and the types of information that you have. Even though it doesn't have direct identifiers, it's not even coded, there are sometimes when demographics can place that person, okay, depending on what it is. So a lot of times what we look at is the HIPAA 18 identifiers, and if it's void of those HIPAA identifiers, then typically we'll say it's de-identified for the purposes of moving through the definition of human subject. Okay, so zip codes and names and all that kind of stuff. And so it has to meet both the research definition as well as the human subject's definition in order to move forward for IRB review. Okay, and you can make that decision on your own. Okay, but if you do not want to make that decision on your own, some people do not. A lot of students also do not, right? Because they don't want to make a mistake and be wrong. So there's an excluded form that we have that can be submitted. It's a single-page form. It's going to ask you to check off whether you feel it meets the definition of research as well as the definition of human subjects, ask a few other questions, and then just a little summary of what's going to happen in the study. And so that's something that can be submitted and looked at and reviewed. We can deem it excluded for review. It typically doesn't go up to the reviewer standpoint, so it usually stays in our office, in the Human Subjects Office, and we do those reviews. If it's deemed excluded, a letter will be put up in IRB net, and especially for students, it's something that they could say, I went to the IRB, they reviewed what I was doing, they said it was excluded, here's my letter. Okay, so that's something very nice. And students can submit excluded review forms without a PI. Okay, it's the only form that students can do on their own. And it's nice because if they want to move forward with what they're doing, with whatever their project is, they can do it. If it's excluded, they don't need to move forward. Okay? But as a PI, if it's your decision for your students to come through you because you want to have access to that information, then that's something that you would dictate with your students. Okay? But it is something that we won't require a PI when it comes in. Okay? If it's not excluded, so say for example, it doesn't meet the definition of research. Okay, so maybe it's a QI project that's not going out. It's a student project inside the class. They're not intending it for generalizable knowledge at that point. Then we would deem it excluded. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. So we would just have them submit, and then we would deem it excluded and move forward. Okay. So that's something that is nice for the students to be able to move forward and do that without any PI interaction with that. Okay, so the next ones are exempt and excluded, and then there's some a lot of similarities between exempt and excluded. Or I'm sorry, exempt and expedited, and it's mainly because both of them have to meet this minimal risk definition. Okay, and some of the research categories are very, very similar. There's just one little tweak that makes it either exempt or expedited. Okay, so the minimal risk definition essentially is what you would encounter in everyday life. Okay, so everyday medical examinations, everyday psychological evaluations. That's what we term minimal risk. Okay, so here at UNLV, the majority of the studies that we do are minimal risk. There's a very small, I mean, maybe even 0.5% of the studies are greater than minimal risk, which then necessitates full board review at that, okay? But otherwise, exempt and expedited, those are most common research that we're doing at UNLV right now, okay? Yes?
Would you mind giving us a couple of examples?
Yes,
Oh,
yep,
okay.
yep, I'm moving to, yeah. Okay, so, all right, so one of the main differences right now with the current regulations is that exemptions don't have an expiration date. We give it a 3-year expiration date because we don't want to leave studies open and accessible for review by the feds if it doesn't need to be. So we give a 3-year expiration date. If you're still going, what you do is you just send us an email or project mail inside of IRBnet and say, I still want to continue it, and we'll give you another 3 years. Okay, it's a pretty simple process with exemptions. For expedited, right now, there is an expiration date of 1 year. With the regulations, we can't give you an approval for greater than 1 year. So we give you a 1-year expiration date, but there's an option to submit what's called a continuing review. Give us essentially a progress report on the study. It's reviewed by the IRB, and then another year is typically given. Okay. So common exempt research. So one of them is regular and special educational instructional techniques or comparison on instructional techniques. Okay, so one of the caveats for this, however, is that the instructional techniques are things that are common. Okay, it's not a new method. If it's a new method, it can't be exempted under this category. Okay. All right, so surveyed interview research with adults, and it has to be recorded without identifiers. If there are identifiers, then it has to be without risk to their reputation, to employability, and those sorts of things. Okay, so we take a look at it. If it does have identifiers, then we look at the risk section and see if we feel it has some of those types of risks. If so, it just can't be exempted. It would be moved up to the expedited categories. Okay, and there's a category for survey research there as well. And then publicly available secondary data or data recorded without identifiers is also under the exemptions. The difficulty with this, so the example that Dr. Braun-Mans had given is the data without identifiers. If you go through the Office of Human Research Protections, they have this decision chart, and I can go out and show you where that is. And if you go through the decision chart, you would see that publicly available data or data without identifiers is actually not exempt, but actually not even human subjects research, but there is a category in the regulations for it. So it depends on the types of data. If it's data that there's demographics where we think there might be a potential for identification, then we sometimes, instead of excluding it, we'll move it up to exemptions, and we're just kind of, a little more careful with that, seeing that we'll still see the review every 3 years, just in case. So that's kind of where that line is drawn between not human subjects with exemptions. It's kind of a fine line, and it depends on the information that's collected. Okay. And then category 2, which is survey, interviews, observation of public behavior, that can't be done with kids unless the observation happens and the researcher is not interacting with the subject when they do the observation. Okay. So say, for example, at a public park, you're going to document how many kids are playing and how many kids are just sitting. Okay. If the researcher is just standing and making those observations, then that could be something that's under the exemption category 2 and not something that needs to be moved forward. If the researcher is interacting with the children to see what those observations might be, asking them, why are you not playing? Those kinds of things, then it wouldn't be able to fit in category 2. It would be moved up to expedited at that point. Okay. Is that, yeah, okay. All right, so common expedited research, blood samples, and when there are blood samples, finger sticks, those are all good, but if you're doing venous blood draw, then there's a certain limit that we have available to be able to do through the expedited categories. It's a factor of how much the person weighs, if it's an adult, how often you're doing the blood draw. So if you do the blood draw more than 2 times a week, even though the amount of the blood is less than the 550, then we would need to take it up to full board at that point. Okay. All right, prospective biological samples. So things like the saliva, hair, nail clippings, those kinds of things, those can go through the expedited procedure. Collection of data through non-invasive procedures. MRIs, EKGs, EEGs. If you're doing DEXA, that would have to go full board. Okay, that would automatically go full board. Secondary data originally collected for non-research purposes, so medical records, school records, okay, any of those types of things. If it was originally collected for non-research purposes, then it would go through that area. And then survey, interview, oral history, focus group, similar to exemptions, except for depending on the information that you collect and the information that you're asking about and that you're getting. If it doesn't fit in the exempt category clearly, then we would put it into the expedited category. Okay? And the main difference is that through the exemptions, it's something that we can do inside of the Human Subjects Office. So it's not something we typically send up to review by the chairs. And it's just that, the more people that review it, the longer the time takes, right? So if I have a reviewer review it for me, I have to wait for that review, then I can send out whatever information it is to you as researchers. So that takes a little more time. Expediteds automatically have to go up to a reviewer. And a reviewer is usually an IRB member, okay? Either chair, co-chair, or an experienced member. Okay. All right. So full board, of course, is anything that doesn't fit the excluded exemptions or expediteds, but some of them that are common are the vulnerable populations. So there's 3 specific vulnerable populations dictated by the regulations. First one is children. Now with kids, what we can do, we were originally, years ago when I started, any research with kids because of the vulnerable population automatically took it to the full board. And what we do at the full board is we do a risk assessment of the research when we're there, because that helps us dictate how the continuing review can be funneled through either the IRB or through the expedited procedure. And we were finding that most of the research that we were doing and we were evaluating in the full board was expedited. it was minimal risk. So it could actually go through that procedure. But because it's a vulnerable population, we wanted to make sure that it had that, extra look at it because the population is vulnerable. So what we've done now is any research with kids, we send it to both the chair and the co-chair. And if both of them decide that it's minimal risk, then it can go through the expedited procedure. But if either one of them feel that there's something that they want to have reviewed at the full board, okay, if it's potentially greater than minimal risk, then it goes up to the full board. So that's our way for, having that extra protection for this vulnerable population, but then also if it's minimal risk, it can get done through the expedited procedure, which is a little quicker for the researchers, okay? So it's kind of a happy medium for us. Pregnant women, if they are your population of interest, those potentially can go full board. It all depends on what you're doing with the population. Prisoners, no matter what, if that's your population of interest, then those automatically go full board. We don't have any other option for prisoners, okay? Decisionally impaired, it will depend on the types of research. They are not a specific population in the regulations that have additional protections, but it's one that we consider. Any research greater than minimal risk, if you're doing sensitive issues or deception research where you're withholding information from your subjects and then giving them that information later, those potentially could go full board also. There are some minor deception studies that we do take through the expedited procedure, but we typically don't do it through the exemptions just because we want to have that extra look, okay? We want to have the IRB take a look. And the full board, of course, is monthly for each board. If we don't have any protocols, then we cancel the meetings. So the nice thing is that, while having an idea of which review category you might go through, you submit it to us and we help make those determinations as it goes through. Depending on the form, and we'll go through some of the forms in a minute, depending on the form that you submit, if you submit the protocol proposal form, which is kind of our general form, then you're good for any review category, and we'll deem it as such once you come in. If you submit the excluded, but it's not excluded, we're going to have you submit something else, right? If you do the exempt form and it's not exempt, we'll have you do another form as well. So usually the protocol proposal form is the best because it'll take care of any category, and it really is only a couple more pages than the exemptions, unless you always do exemptions. People who do the same types of research and always get exemptions, they know that they can submit the exempt form. If you're overseeing students, I would suggest the protocol proposal form, okay, just in case. Does that help? All right, so previously approved protocols. So once you get your protocol approved, sometimes you have changes before you even get it approved sometimes, right? So anytime you have any change in your research, even if it's, say, an additional survey question, then you would submit it through the modification process, gain approval before you institute the change. If your study, you're trying to get a modification, but it doesn't affect what you're currently doing in your study, you don't have to stop your study altogether. You just can't institute the change you're asking for until that change is approved. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's one way, especially if you're changing one aspect that doesn't make a difference as you move forward through your study. It's fine to continue going. You don't have to stop altogether. And then the continuing reviews are that yearly update. And typically the IRB net system gives you a notice about 30 to 60 days, or 30 and 60 days, I believe, prior. And it'll let you know when the expiration date is. So what you want to do is try and submit your continuing review form about 30 days before. Our review times are anywhere from 7 to 14 days, sometimes a little longer, depending on how many proposals we have in. But even if you don't get an expiration notice, it is your responsibility as a PI to submit your continuing review. And when we get into IRBNet, I can show you where that information is. Okay. So how long does review take? So that's kind of the big question. And it depends on a lot of different things. So the level of review obviously is something that affects it. If you submit an excluded form, it's something that we can sometimes return to you the same day I've had them done. Usually that's because I've already had a phone call with someone and I've discussed it with them and I see it come in, pull it, and exclude it. But the average for exclusions are about 7 days. Just because you have to get in line, basically, as you all know, those who submit. But if it's something that you're dependent on, that you need to have a decision made before you can move forward, and it's something that's a deadline, just let us know. Same with any other review. Let us know, because research opportunities come up, and that's just the way things are. So let us know, and we'll try and get to your proposal as soon as we can. The condition of the proposal, of course, is also very important. If you don't submit all the forms that we need, the information isn't completed within the forms that are submitted, then that can affect it, because then we have to submit it back to you, and we go back and forth and dance a little bit, and then it gets approval, okay? And then all the documents are submitted. So typically there's some sort of application form. Usually most studies have some form of a consent form. If you're doing surveys or interviews, we want to see all of those. Recruitment materials, all those kinds of things. And if they're not submitted, we'll have to come back to you for that information. Then when you come back, then you get back in line, that whole thing. So the current review time actually right now is at about 30 days. The national average is about 33. So we're actually a little bit under. It depends on so many different things in addition to that, like staffing. We've been understaffed for quite a while, and I just got one more staff member at the beginning of December, so there's a training period also. So it all depends on that. Okay, so IRBNet, many of you know, is the web-based system that we utilize for submission, and it is completely paper-based, so we don't have any paper records anymore. We've had it for, I think, 3 years now, and I think it's been pretty good. Any form that you might need is inside IRBNet, and what I would suggest is that when you have a new project, go into IRBNet and download the most current form. We've said for some time we're going to be changing some forms, but there's been a lot of things that affect that, but within the next 6 months we're going to be making some major changes to the forms. We're going to try and have some separate submission forms for student research to help kind of channel those in a certain direction once they come in the office as well, and try and get those done a little bit quicker. So students have to submit with a faculty member as the principal investigator, the PI. And there is a PI eligibility policy with certain titles that incur automatic PI status, or you have the ability to submit a PI eligibility form. Students, however, can never submit for PI eligibility and gain that. Okay, they have to submit under a faculty advisor as the principal investigator. Okay. And one of the nice things about IRBNet, though, is the student has a lot of control inside IRBNet. So they can go in, create a username and password, go in and download all of the forms and complete a lot of the documents and get ready for the interaction with their PI. Okay, so there's a lot of things that the student can do. They can even upload all of the forms there, but one of the things they have to do is name their advisor or a PI who's eligible for PI status on the proposal, and then they have to share the proposal with them in IRBNet. Otherwise, the PI can't see any of the documents that were uploaded. Okay, so that's very important. I can show you in IRBNet too when we get there.
Yes. So for the eligibility form,
yes,
who would be the person need to fill out those kind of forms? Like faculty automatically gain the PI status, or because I never.
Yeah, so there's certain titles that are automatic PI status. So assistant, associate, full professors, research professors, center directors, those are people who have automatic PI status. Faculties in residence or some of the other titles, those would be where you would have to submit the PI eligibility form, and they are project by project basis. Okay, so it's a form where you would complete your information, it would complete what the project is about, and it would be signed by the chair and the dean, and then you could turn it in to us and we'll help you get the VPR signature at that point. Okay, and that can be done all electronically too. So it could be submitted when you submit a proposal in IRBNet, or it can be done beforehand. So if you're wondering, do I even put myself as PI? If I don't get PI status, what do we do? There's ways to change that if you have already submitted a proposal, but you could always start it ahead of time too. It doesn't have to be when you have a proposal like ready to submit in IRBNet. We can still do the forms outside of that. In that case, you would just email us the forms with the chair and dean signature, and we'll move through the rest. Yeah. Yes.
Someone has, a lot of our firsts it's non-ranked, but it is a rank of associate or assistant professor. If someone has full graduate status, is that an assumed, they still have to go through?
They still have to go through yeah. And we are in the process of making some changes to the PI eligibility. we now have the School of Medicine that have all these additional titles as well. So we've been looking at it whether it's a factor of a certain percentage of FTE. It all depends. And, some of these titles are different between schools and colleges also. So we're looking at that also.
So you would send it back to the person if they didn't have PI status?
Yeah. If they're not eligible, if the VPR doesn't sign off, then we'll let you know. And then it would have to go through another process. It would have to usually have another PI there.
And you said it's per project?
It's per project.
So
Yeah.
if they have to do another study, they have to do the
Yeah.
form again?
It does, yeah. And, the thing is that positions change also, right? So there are sometimes people come in one title and they end up changing. So that's why we also have it per project. So as time goes on, if things change, now you have qualification as PI, then that's good. Yep. Okay. All right, so I went over some of this already. Protocol proposal form is the most comprehensive, informed consent. Any recruitment materials that you're going to utilize, we want to see all of them. So no matter what type you're going to have, we want to see them all. If you have multiple types of recruitment, so say you have a flyer and also an email script, just let us know which one's which. When you submit, it could be all in one document, it could be separate, uploaded separately, however you prefer. Instruments we also need to see, so surveys, interview guides, focus group guides, we want to see all of that. For your survey, especially for internet surveys, we don't require the internet link anymore. We want to have them in paper form, right? Word document or a PDF uploaded, because when the link to the survey is no longer there, we still need to have that information inside of your file, okay, in case we get audited. Facility authorization forms, that's only for research happening at another location, so off of UNLV property. If you're going to recruit, if you're going to post flyers or do announcements at another location, but you're not actually conducting the research at that location, that's not something you need a facility authorization for. Only when you're going to physically go there and collect the data at that location, okay? There's a template inside of IRBnet that you can utilize. What needs to be done is you fill out all of your information, you give it to the facility, they print it on their letterhead, and whoever's authorized to sign it, and you will scan it in and upload it as one of the documents in IRBnet, and you can keep the original for your records, okay? If you're going to do research at CCSD, they do have a research review process at CCSD. Typically, you get review here first, and then you go through the CCSD process. But there's also what we call facility acknowledgement, because a little less legal language for each of the principals at each of the schools you're going to be at to sign for. And then you upload them there too, okay? Yes?
I'm thinking of particular situations that
Uh-huh.
questions come up.
Yes?
If someone is exempt or excluded,
Mhm.
exempt or excluded, do they still need all the instruments and the recruitment material, et
So-
cetera?
With the excluded, you just submit the excluded form. If we need any more information, then we'll come back to you for that. Exemptions, yes, because we need to be able to see all of that. Because exemption is still human subjects research, we still have responsibility for oversight of that study. Okay, so yes, for all of that. It's always better to put too much in there than not enough, just saying. We like to see a lot of stuff. I like to read a lot of stuff. Yeah. There's a lot of DNP students that require also an IRB at the location that they're going to be doing the research at. We'll take that in lieu of the facility acknowledgement. If they already have approval at that location, absolutely, yeah.
And does CCSC has their own IRB or
They-
just a facility acknowledgement?
So yeah, they both. So we need the facility acknowledgement, but they have what's called a research review committee. It's not actually a registered IRB, but they require any research being done at CCSC schools, and I believe with the students as well, even if it's not at the school, to be reviewed by their research review committee. We haven't been in touch with them in the last year or two, so I would talk to them. What they've done in the past is if you're sponsored by someone at CCSD, they'll let you go through both processes at the same time. Otherwise, you'll have to go through our process first, and then go through their process. Okay. And then CIT, of course, for all of the members. Usually we check that right when you get submitted, and we take a look at that. Yes.
How often do you require?
5 years. Yeah, so that's kind of nice. If you're new faculty, if you have it at another institution, we do usually accept that as well. What you want to do, though, is upload it. We only have access to the CITIs for people who took it with UNLV. We don't have access to other institutions, but we will accept them. So every time you do a study, if you want to use another institution's CITI, just upload a copy of it. There is a way to put it into your profile also in IRB.net. So if you put it in your profile as a training, then when you have a study, you can just click to upload it without having to find it from your computer. Okay, so there's an easy way to do that. So common pitfalls, supporting documents aren't included. We talked about that a little bit. Subject selection, so we do take a look at that. If you're excluding based on certain things like gender, religion, race, those kinds of things, then we ask for you to provide justification, and those are all part of the application form. One of the other pitfalls is we have difficulty evaluating your study design, most of the time because there's not enough information in the section where it talks about the complete description of the study. So the who, what, where, when, and why, you want to tell us everything, and just make an assumption that the person reading it is not from nursing. Okay, so discipline-specific terms, if you could provide the definitions, that's super helpful. And then consistency between documents is almost an everyday thing. So information in the protocol form doesn't match the consent form, doesn't match the recruitment. And what you want to remember is the protocol form is something that the IRB is going to review. I mean, they're reviewing everything, but really the protocol form is for the IRB to review. And then the consent documents and the recruitment, that's for the subject to review. Okay, so that needs to be in language that the subject will understand, but things like how much time it will take, the specific procedures, the risks of the study, they should be same, but they could be in a little bit different language based on your population. Okay, we have templates for the consent documents, and you can utilize them, but you can change them as well. So if you need, larger font, if you want a different style of letter, instead of heading format like we have it, you can do that. Same with signature. There's ways we can waive the signature requirement on the informed consent documents. Typically it's minimal risk, or if like an internet survey, we have the ability to waive the signature requirement. Okay, so consider that as well. All right, so tips for PIs with students. So as I said, students can start a proposal. They have a lot of control inside of the IRB.net system, which is really nice for students. But you have to share the proposal so they can see, the PI can see all the documents that are going to be submitted. We talked about the eligibility criteria a little bit, but working with the student on the content of it. Some people feel that the IRB can do that and help teach the students, and we would prefer not to do that. We would prefer your expertise as the PIs. We're really looking at it from a different standpoint. We're looking at it for protection of human subjects and that side, and not from the content that you would need for your discipline. So we would appreciate that. And then review for consistency of the information between the different documents. And also the PI has to sign as the PI inside the proposal before the proposal can be submitted to the office, okay, through IRB.net. So that's something that usually takes a little more time. If the student goes ahead and submits it, we have to unlock the proposal and we have to wait for the PI to sign. So for us, it's really not truly submitted till the PI signs it and sends it back, okay? And that's really important. We waste a lot of time with that. All right, references for your reading pleasure. Questions, many of you know you can call anytime, email anytime with any question, no matter how big, how small, and we'll definitely provide the help. I have a couple more employees now, so you may or may not get me, but you're certainly welcome to call me directly and ask me any questions that you may have. So, yes.
Yes, is there any compliance issue? I always just add the students to my account because I don't want to go back and forth between accounts and share the study with them. There's no compliance issues. Is there with doing that?
So are you saying you're giving them your username and password that I didn't hear you say?
I'm not that.
Okay, so yeah.
So you add them as a co-investigator. I forgot how you do it, but as long as they're in CITI, you can find them with the drop-down.
Oh, I see.
I just add them to mine so I can see everything all the time versus having them work in a separate account and then send me documents.
Well, and inside IRB.net, as long as they share it with you, then you'll actually see it as one of your proposals. So it all depends on how you want to set up. So Cyber IRB was a software where the PI had a lot of control. So PIs had to start a proposal for a student. And so the student wouldn't be able to see anything until the PI started it. In IRB.net, it's not that way. However, if you prefer it to be that way, then there's many PIs who decide to do that. They say, okay, you register for IRB.net. You let me know once you've registered for IRB, otherwise you can't add them on a study. Then I'll start the proposal, and we'll add the documents that we've worked on together through email. That's one way you can do it, and you can absolutely do that. But as far as student research in itself, a student project should stand on its own. So if a faculty member has a research study that they're doing, and let's say the student wants to use some of the data from a faculty's research, they need to actually submit their own proposal with their own purpose, and that's also for legal reasons to help protect the students, okay? And on the protocol proposal form, we have a location for the PI, the student investigator, and protocol coordinator. We're going to remove the co-PI very soon. But the student investigator, if there's a student investigator in that slot, I make the assumption this is for a student's thesis or dissertation. Okay? Otherwise, the student is just a research team member, and they're listed under the research team member section. Okay? So if push comes to shove, that project is the student's project. So you don't want to do that, especially if this is your research project. You want to add them as a research team member if they're working with you to gain experience. But if it's their project, they need a standalone IRB to say what they're doing with this data, even if it's secondary data from your project. Okay, does that help? Okay, you had a question? Or did that answer it?
Well, no, that's actually some really good information because
Okay.
with the School of Medicine students
Mhm.
having
That's a
several
whole
of us-
nother,
Right.
yeah,
And I'm glad
it's a
you said
whole
that
nother
because-
issue.
Because a
Yeah.
student that another colleague and I were going to work with,
Mhm.
we thought we were going to add the student to the project.
Mhm.
So from what I'm hearing you saying, the student, even though it's going to be a secondary analysis of existing data, needs to,
Yeah, we'll want to have a separate proposal for them so that they have the responsibility essentially for that part of the study, whatever it might be, and it's not something that's part of your overarching study. Yeah, absolutely. I want to keep it separate.
So if we're adding a student to the research team,
Yeah.
and the research has already been approved, and they were not in the original protocol, do we put that in the IRB.net as well, include their name, although they're handling the identified data?
So you're saying they are working on your project?
Yeah, also, yeah, I have a student that just came in, and
Okay.
my project's already been approved.
Yeah, so you do need to add them. They can't work on the project until they've been approved on your project. And then they would submit their own study for their part of the project.
No, it's my research study, but I'm adding a student.
Oh, yeah, and it's not their student project.
No.
Yeah, then you would just need to add them through a modification. Yeah, and then they couldn't be involved until it's approved. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, let's hold your question for
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, and I'll go to IRB.net afterwards too, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, okay, so
Yeah.
Kevin Donegan will have like 5 minutes.
If that.
Okay.
I'll be up and down, no worries.
Okay.
Good morning. So as Cindy's been talking about, there are a lot of opportunities that you have and resources that you have for research. And so I want you to consider another one. And that's adding a director of communications to your pre-planning phase when you're starting to look at your research and what you're going to do and where you're going to do it. Now, for us, that means me. But if you're collaborating with other schools, think about getting their director of communications involved. There's a number of different things that we can do to help you, and I'm going to talk about 3 of them. First, think about other sites. I mean, the reason I'm bringing this up is I've had faculty come from School of Nursing and Allied Health Sciences, and they said, hey, Kevin, I'm working on this project. I'm studying X. I need 5 more participants. Can you help? Well, of course. Let's get together. Let's talk about what we're going to do with flyers or media interviews or radio interviews. Let's get it going. But then the comment afterward is always, well, we need IRB approval. And as Cindy mentioned, IRB approval typically takes about 30 days, I think you said?
Average.
Average?
Yeah.
But that's 30 days that you've got to wait until we can get going on things. So the idea is, even if you know your primary site is awesome and you're secure that it's going to give you all of your participants, think about a secondary and a tertiary setting or a tertiary site. If you put those in place in advance and we know where we're going to go, then you've got that in your back pocket so that when you do need those extra 5, you can already start looking at a place where you can get them. Now for me, especially if you're new in Las Vegas, I've been doing PR and marketing in the city since 2005. And admittedly, I don't know everybody, but I still have contacts with some of my clients. I'm with the Las Vegas Medical District on one of their committees, and I'm meeting with a multitude of organizations in just that geography of our city, and some of those companies have clinical sites all over the valley. So there's opportunities where we can sit down and start talking about a secondary site, and it may be with an imaging center, it may be with another clinical site, it may be in a bank. I mean, I don't know. There's multiple opportunities. So thinking about those secondary sites ahead of time just puts us ahead of the game. Also, as editors, writers, communicators, we can help prepare those materials. And we can also think about more than just, let's get a flyer up in the student union, let's put an email together and blast it. What about doing a radio interview at KUNV if you're trying to target UNLV faculty, staff, and students? If there's opportunities for a media interview, what can we talk about? And can we get those reporters to come to us to talk about the study you're doing and get the information out that way? I mean, that's more of an external idea, but there are multiple things that we can start talking about so that, again, if you're at your primary site and you know that if you talk to so-and-so, so-and-so will get the message to everybody. Well, that's great. But just in case you need those extra 5 again, we can have a secondary email set up. If you need students, we can have something prepared to go to rave or to send. If you're looking outside, do we do a radio interview with KXNT and talk about how your research is impacting the delivery of care in Las Vegas or Nevada? But we can have those things set up, lined up, and as directors of communication, we typically have those connections with either the outside media or the inside media here at UNLV. Thirdly, when do we get this out? Oftentimes it's, all right, we're ready to go, we've got approval, push the flyer, and then the flyer goes out, and then what? It's out there, right? But can we pair it with something? Can we pair it with a radio interview? Can we pair it with an email 2 weeks later as a follow-up? So it's not just always going into UNLV today, and we're not redoing the flyers around the building or in different campus areas. Let's have a secondary source. I mean, many of you recognize that when you hear something often enough, you start to remember it. When you see it often enough, you start to remember it. So if you're looking at a flyer on the wall and you see a poster in the elevator and you're hearing something on your favorite radio station, that's going to resonate. And so if we have that strategy in place, so it's not just throw it out and check that box off, you've got a better opportunity for acquiring those subjects and those participants that you need. So ultimately, and Jennifer's laughing at me, I told you it was going to be brief. By getting the directors of communication involved, we can help you think and brainstorm about secondary and tertiary sites. We can help you prepare, edit, craft, whatever messages, and talk about the different vehicles that we can use to get your information out there. And then thirdly, we can talk about a strategy as to when to push those messages out and how often to get them in front of people. And if they're not working, we've already got other pieces ready to go, so if we need to do public service announcements, we can submit those immediately and not have to go back to Cindy's group and get IRB approval. Questions?
Quick question. Address it. So for those follow-up announcement strategies, we have to go back and do those follow-ups and phone calls, for example. Do those need to go back to IRB for additional review?
If it wasn't originally in the proposal, then yes. So that's why you want to think about them at the outset.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's one of the things that's come up. It's just we get the request for, let's get those extra 5, those extra 10, and it doesn't seem too difficult to do, but you've got to prepare it for one, and then you've got to reapprove it. So if we can take out that 30-day average window, you're already marching forward. And you guys know where to find me. All right, thanks.